Yesterday was the feast of Pope St. Pius X on the new calendar. And you would think that dioceses would ignore it. Most of them do, typically. Or they will say some things about reforming the breviary or something, often as a way of suggesting that he would approve of the liturgical reforms that happened 60 years after his death, which is, of course, nonsense. But we had a shocking statement from a diocese. I never expected to see anything quite like what I'm about to show you. Published by an actual Catholic diocese in the United States, the Diocese of Lansing, Michigan, actually posted the following here. So I'll just pull this up on Facebook. Right from their official Facebook account. I'm just going to read this verbatim for you. Because right now what we have, once I go back to where I'm supposed to be, I'm on a laptop traveling. My apologies, folks. All right, so here is what the Diocese of Lansing had to say about the crisis in the church and about modernism. I was shocked to see them even mention the heresy of modernism at all on an official diocesan account. It's the heresy that most of the hierarchy in the church today would like you to not know exists. Because if you do know what it exists and what its basics are, you'll start to ask some questions about the state of the church, because we are in the grip of the modernist heresy. They run things in the church right now and have for 70 years or more. But again, here is what the Diocese of Lansing had to say. Why Pius X's condemnation of modernism still matters, by Michael Andrews. Today is the feast of St. Pius X, who was Pope from 1903 to his death in 1914 at the age of 79. Among his many towering achievements, Pope Pius notably condemned the heresy of modernism in two formal documents, Lamentabili and Pascendi, both published in 1907. But what is modernism, and why is it so bad? Quoting Pius X, modernists held that dogmas, including the divinity of Christ and the redemptive value of his death, actually he's quoting Michael Andrews, were the product of an evolution in Christian thinking over time, and so could be completely changed, explains Michael Andrews, Chancellor of the Diocese of Lansing, pictured. St. Pius X rightly rejected that modernism is, at its root, essentially an atheistic error. And they suggest you read his full article. Here's another excerpt. The first pope of the 20th century, Pope St. Pius X, was elected to the papacy in 1903 and served until his death 11 years later. The bright and cheerful second born of 10 children, he aspired to the priesthood from a young age, etc., etc. The praise of God might resound. He trained the parish choir to a high degree of excellence in Gregorian chant. He arranged for the instruction of old and young in the fundamentals of the Catholic faith. He was a diligent brother to the poor. Though he would later serve as a seminary professor, bishop, and as Cardinal Patriarch of Venice, he would remain a country priest at heart. He took the motto to restore all things in Christ. His program as Pope was a continuation of the priorities that he set forth early in his priesthood: the sacredness of divine worship, the promotion of the faith in its fullness, and generous service to the poor. To promote the faith, the Pope was concerned with the ordinary parishioners have a simple, brief catechism for their use, hence why he put together the Catechism of St. Pius X. As a safeguard to the faith, he condemned the heresy of modernism in two formal documents, Lamentelli and Pascendi, both published in 1907. Modernism is a theory about the origin and nature of Christianity, reducing it to a matter of subjective experience. Modernists denied any objective revelation from God to the human race, nor any reasonable grounds for credibility in the Christian faith based on miracles or the testimony of history. Faith for the modernists was uniquely from within, a merely natural instinct belonging to the emotions, which cannot be expressed in words or doctrinal formulations. Modernists did not seek so much to abandon any of the traditional statements of Catholic teaching, but to redefine their meaning according to a new rationalistic interpretation. Thus, they proposed that divine revelation and the teachings of the Church are only an expression of the subconscious, subject to continual evolution. Modernists held that dogmas, including the divinity of Christ and the redemptive value of his death, were the products of an evolution in Christian thinking over time, and so could be completely changed. St. Pius X rightly judged that modernism is at its roots essentially an atheistic error. And he goes on to talk about what he taught about the poor. It's worth noting here that they're posting this at a time when we are being told about the need to, quote, reform the church, and how when lip service is being paid to what the church teaches about morality, but then saying we need to change the teaching, most notably on the death penalty. What did Francis say about that? He essentially said the church was wrong. Take all the time you need to understand the implications of that to say that the church was wrong about an issue of morality. And yet they say that things change, and so morality can change. And that's the problem. Therein lies the problem. Modernism is an attack on the actual sanctity of the faith itself, the very integrity of Catholicism. The church makes a couple of fundamental claims, one of which is that it was founded on the rock of Peter by Christ himself, who gave the church authority to teach all nations everything that he taught them. That when they hear the voice of the apostles, they hear his voice. When you say the church makes mistakes or that their teachings no longer apply, you undermine that authority. The truth is immutable. It doesn't change. We're not talking about, mutable truths like weather conditions or the state of your health or your state of your pocketbook or other things that change over time. Morality is not something that changes over time. So to see a diocese grab onto this and teach that is shocking, because there has been a very real effort in our time to make it seem like Pius X didn't exist, or to focus on the one thing the modernists like from him, which is that he emphasized active participation in the Mass. They take that phrase from him. Now, they mean different things than he meant when he talked about active participation. He wanted the laity to sing the Mass parts. He wanted the laity to actively pray with the priest, meaning actually pray not necessarily the same things he was praying. There are some parts of the Mass reserved for the priest, obviously, but to pray with him, with their intentions united to what was happening at the altar. Active participation, as opposed to Catholic calisthenics and all the other things that we see going on now. But they take the term active participation, essentially from Pius X, as well as, some of the nice things he said about music. But they tend to ignore the modernists' things. In fact, I've actually seen some Catholics, some self-described Catholics, embrace being modernists, and they call us all sorts of nasty things for being opposed to modernism, like really mean things. Like they call us evil for being opposed to modernists. They say it's like a form of bigotry, essentially, if you're going to believe that's what we're guilty of. Now, this was published at the same time that Vigano published something that I think is also relevant here. So we go to Vigano, who posted this on X. Apologies, I'm not presently logged into X because I'm on the road. So my laptop hadn't been used in something like, a long time. But we'll go here to his post on X so you can take a look at it. It says, the conciliar synodal revolution undermines the authority of the Roman pontiff and the authority of the bishops as successors of the apostles, dissolving both into spurious entities such as episcopal conferences, the synod of bishops, and ecclesial conferences, recently inaugurated in the Amazonian Church, but to be extended to the entire church according to well-known practice. Synodality definitively subverts the divine constitution of the Catholic Church and the Roman papacy. Their destruction through the transformation into something else is the necessary premise for the establishment of the reign of the Antichrist, who requires a state church with an honorary papacy presiding over the religion of humanity. Control will be in the hands of the collegial bodies, in which a small elite will wield power, ostensibly democratic and synodal, without setting any limits. This is the ecclesial version of the worldwide technocracy. The process is all too evident from the coherence of the steps that have been taken. Here are the key milestones. Now he's going to go over a historical timeline of these events. Remember what we said about Pius X warning about essentially the immutability of the faith, warning how they reject the immutability of the faith and how everything can change. That because the faith is born out of evolution, right? 1964, the Episcopal Collegiality was established in a Vatican II document, that's a very controversial Vatican II document called Lumen Gentium. That same year, the establishment of Episcopal conferences. 1965, the establishment of the Synod of Bishops and related reforms of its regulations. Now, some will say that there had always been synods. Yes, a synod was just a small meeting of the church, not a full-on council. Sometimes It would be a synod of bishops in a region would meet. Sometimes it would be select bishops chosen by the Pope or some other mechanism. But the Synod of Bishops itself didn't exist until 1965. In 1966, bishops were forced to retire at the age of 75. In 1970, collegial and the emeritus papacy were proposed by Ratzinger and Ronner. That is actually true. They proposed that in 1970. In 1995, the reinterpretation of the papacy from an ecumenical perspective in Ut Unum Sint. This is where you began to see the authority of the papacy undermined under John Paul II with the idea of a less authoritative papacy for the promotion of ecumenical dialogue. In 2013, of course, you had the birth of the emeritus papacy, the Munus Ministerium renunciation debacle under Benedict XVI. 2015, Francis proposes synodality. He coins a word that means nothing still. 2020, the creation of the Amazon Ecclesial Conference, Church of Charisms versus Ministerial Church. This is something that cannot be understated. The church has always been engaged in the ministry. It has always been engaged in the providing of the sacraments, spreading the gospel, and of course helping the poor and some other things. This turned into more activism in 2020. You see this in the language of the bishops of the Amazon. They are completely in love with politics and the sound of their own voice. It's all they talk about. In 2024, theorization of the synodal papacy document, the Bishop of Rome. Now that document finishes the job of decentralizing the papacy, taking the authority of the Pope, stripping it down and making the Pope just first among equals, the way the Eastern Orthodox, the so-called Orthodox, see the papacy, as well as some higher church Protestants. It was a proposed document. It hasn't been formalized, at least not yet. We shall see. And in 2025, theorization of the Church of Charisms. Now you have this political activism and dressed up under the of Catholic language from 2020's Amazon Synod. And then Vigano continues and concludes here, says, what motivates the proponents of this Church of Charisms, this multifaceted, polyhedric, and fluid entity, is the desire to overthrow the catechon, the only earthly and at the same time divine institution that can delay the coming of the Antichrist. The Church must no longer be one, holy, Catholic, apostolic, and Roman, because there are precisely these notes that make the Church truly Christ's. She must not derive her authority from Christ the King and Pontiff, but from a people that false shepherds have ensnared in faith and morality. And this is Luciferian. As you can see, Vigano is not exactly a fan of the things going on these days. Now, he's connecting a lot of these things together to kind of make the point, and that we are continuing on a path of fundamental radical transformation of the Catholic Church, that nothing seems to have changed on that front. Now, I know some people made a big deal for some reason out of Pope Leo standing up yesterday or a couple days ago saying to the bishops of the Amazon, you don't worship trees. Congratulations, that's common sense. People took that as a repudiation of Pachamama, but now Pachamama literally means Mother Earth, but Francis never worshipped the Pachamama. He was there while others happened. It was the crime of indifference and the crime of idolatry happening in two places at the Vatican, in the Vatican Gardens, first and foremost, and secondly, in St. Peter's Basilica, in what looked like an enthronement ceremony and a nuptial ceremony. That was the crime. But Francis himself didn't get on his knees and worship this goofy-looking wooden statuette. If we have gotten to the point now where we are going to do cartwheels when a figure in the church says something as basic as don't worship the trees, don't worship the created, then we've got a problem. What is needed is an exorcism of the Vatican and a public repudiation of the Pachamama scandal. That hasn't happened yet. And it can't. Not when ecumenical dialogue is the rule of the day in Rome. Ecumenia, this the sacrifice of the authority of the church, its central claim to having been founded by Christ on the rock of Peter, bearer of the truth of God, speaking for God, teaching under God's authority. You cannot have that in ecumenical dialogue. It does not work unless that ecumenical dialogue is aimed for with one purpose, and that is to convince those in schism and those who are apostates and who embraced paganism and other things to renounce those things and to come home to the faith. Short of that, ecumenical dialogue has no point. In fact, it undermines the authority of the church and undermines the church's central claim. So when you don't worship the trees, that's fine. And when we have to have somebody say something like that, that's a problem itself. But the problem with Pachamama was much worse. It was idolatry. And until that is explicitly condemned, we should withhold applause on that. The bishops of the Amazon need to be terminated, fired, removed from their offices, replaced with young, maybe Augustinian priests turned bishops, dedicated to spreading the gospel, to baptizing the locals, which the bishops of the Amazon have refused to do by their own admission. And why is that? Because, again, as Pope St. Pius X stated, the heresy of modernism is this idea that the truth of religion is an evolutionary process. In his document, Pascendi, he goes into this idea called vital immanence. True religion is an interior sense. Every person has this interior lived experience of religion. And to get to the truth of religion, we must share that interior lived experience with one another. And only through sharing and communication and dialogue and all that yada yada stuff can we get to the truth of what religion is. That is why you had idolatry in the Vatican those long ago now, it seems, October 2019, mere weeks before all hell was unleashed on earth. Some of us followed the stories of the affliction of 2020 starting in just a few days after the Pachamama event. We didn't see it as a coincidence. I still don't see it as a coincidence. We need to take the idolatry that happened then seriously, because modernism allows, through this ecumenical dialogue, through this shared experience of vital immanence, the most heinous of things, because it rejects the truth of God. It reduces it to relativism. You and I are just bearers of our own experience, and we share it together. And your experience is just as valid as the Saracen's experience, or the guy who worships the fat philosopher guy from Southeast Asia, or any of the rest of them. It's all valid and equal ways to the Father. And so that's why it was refreshing to have a diocese recommend people read a modern book on Pius X and the heresy of modernism, and they brought that to the people of their diocese. Anything it takes to wake some people up, as long as it doesn't detract from the truth. Oh boy, all right, people trying to cause problems in my chat. I'm curious, though, what you think about this, so let me know in the comments. We're going to go to one more story for the morning. When talking about modernism and the heresy of modernism and what the things that the modernists are trying to do to the church, one of the things that they do in the name of ecumenical dialogue, one of the things they do in the name of evolution of faith and changing religion, one of the things they do is to try to bury the old expressions of the faith in its worship, in its forms, in its visual, almost everything. You'll notice that they come after the unicorn mass, as some people kind of derisively call it, the very conservative, very traditional looking Novus Ordo Mass. They come after that with almost the same fervor as they do the traditional Latin Mass itself. And why is that? It's because it still looks like the old religion. It still has Catholic concepts at its core. That's why they do it, because they don't want the Catholic faith. They want something entirely different. They want the Mass reduced to a community meal where we can share our lived experiences together. And this is why you see, despite the FSSP having been given some sort of handwritten personal guarantee from Pope Francis that they will forever be allowed to say their traditional Mass pretty much without restriction, you get this story. Go to Gloria TV, who gives us this headline: Valence, faithful occupy Notre Dame Church after FSSP expulsion. So I've reported to you several times that the FSSP every year get a apostolic visitation. And for those of you who may not be aware, an apostolic visitation happens these days for the last 20 years or so when something has gone wrong. Typically, Rome will send delegates, typically from the country that they're visiting, on behalf of some curial office or on behalf of the Pope. And it'll be typically a bishop or two or some priests. Oftentimes, priests with serious baggage, McCarrick kind of baggage. It was a weird thing many of us have noticed when we started looking at who these bishops and priests were. This happened to Bishop Strickland, by the way. He received an apostolic visitation just before he got canned. The FSSP gets one of these every year to observe, to make sure that they are teaching the post-conciliar religion. And that, what they do, it's a mechanism for suppression. Now, the FSSP have, by the grace of God, managed to navigate these stormy waters and have every year dodged the canceling sort of shot across the bow. But while that happens, they don't get canceled in Rome. They get canceled locally. Every year, I report at least one time to you on this channel that the FSSP get expelled from some major diocese somewhere. And we had just another one happen. Here's the story. Quote, since early summer, around 300 Catholics of the Mass in the Roman Rite, that's en.news service of Gloria TV's kind of snarky way of saying the traditional Latin Mass, have occupied the Church of Notre Dame in Valence, reports paxliturgique.org. The community was previously served by the priestly fraternity of St. Peter, the FSSP, but was abruptly deprived of its priests by Bishop Francois Durand. He announced that sacraments, catechism, and weekday masses would cease this autumn. Outside the church, banners read, "We are not puppets but Christians," and removing the traditional Mass is a grave mistake. The faithful keep watch day and night and pray the rosary each evening and share meals after Sunday Mass. They denounce the bishop's silence and indifference. Many note that the community, strengthened by young converts since the affliction of 2020, is now left in uncertainty. The bishop has broken our parish like a toy, expelled the FSSP, and then walked away, says one parishioner. While Monsignor Durand has been traveling to Lourdes and Rome, the faithful of Valence have remained inside their church. Earlier in August, parishioners sent an open letter to the bishop asking him to request the same exemption granted to the Diocese of San Angelo, Texas, which permits Holy Mass and the sacraments for 2 more years. The letter states that dialogue with the bishop is broken down. You told us we would no longer be received and that you were leaving on vacation. It is out of necessity, not choice, that we speak to you publicly. And so the parishioners tried to have a synodal dialogue encounter with their bishop. And he expelled the FSSP and then went on vacation. I'm reminded of 20 years ago now, George W. Bush is asked about, something going on in Iraq. And he's talking about how we're going to go after all the bad guys, all this other stuff. And now watch this drive, he says, dressed in full golf attire. And then he hits a golf ball on the golf course. That's what that reminds me of. The utter tone deafness of the situation. They do this. They expel the FSSP and shut down their diocesan traditional Mass offerings that were in full accordance with Traditionis Custodes already. And they do it because they believe Rome will do nothing to stop them. And so far, Rome has done nothing to stop them. Now, the counter-argument is we are only 3 months into a new papacy. Give it time. Perhaps that's true. Perhaps that's the argument. But I will ask a non-rhetorical question. At what point do we stop waiting? Will it be after the episcopal appointments? We keep hearing that Pope Leo is going to name a bunch of new figures to the Roman Curia in the fall. That he has been making his choices and that he's going to start implementing them at some point in late part of August, which means now basically, or September or October. Once those people are appointed, and assuming we don't get the worst case scenario of Fernandez staying where he is and Roach staying where he is and all the worst ones, but let's say we get the moderate approach, which is my prediction, which is some good appointments and some really bad ones, and a lot in between. Once that comes to pass, how much time do you give him until we decide that these things continuing are showing us everything we need to know? How much time? Not a lot of people speaking up on this stuff anymore. You have to ask yourself why that is. Are they afraid of upsetting the apple cart, or have they given up? The FSSP are the main source for the traditional mass for most Catholics who go to the traditional mass, post Traditionis Custodes. And they are getting expelled from dioceses very quietly, a lot of them happening in France. Because the French bishops hate the FSSP and they hate the traditional Catholic movement. Per capita, the traditional Catholic movement is stronger in France than anywhere else in the world, or at least it was. More mass offerings, more mass opportunities for people, more people going to those masses than per capita the US. People tend to think of the US as the capital of this stuff, and it kind of is because of the sheer size and number of people. But in France, per capita was bigger. They are quietly kicking the FSSP out, piecemeal. One diocese here, one diocese there. This isn't even the first time this year I've reported on this happening in France. So again, how long until we are done waiting to find out what the attitude in Rome under new management is on this question? The battle against modernism is about a lot more than just the traditional mass. It's about ecclesiology, the belief the church has of its mission in the world, its relationship to the world, its relationship to God and its relationship to man, and the relationship of man to God. All of those things are part of ecclesiology. The powers that should not be in Rome told us last year and the year before that the ecclesiology of the church is different now than it was before Vatican II. And that's why we can't have the traditional mass anymore. And if you ever wonder why it is that your bishops and priests speak about politics seemingly more than repentance, that's why. It's about ecclesiology. You got hints of this at Vatican II in the run-up to Vatican II, with opening the windows of the church to the world to let some fresh air of secularism in. So the question remains, how long do we wait until we have an idea of what's going on before we stop giving benefits of the doubt to people? I'm curious what people think about this, so let me know in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. Sharing this on social media helps too. Also, some prayers for my family and I. We are going to ending our road trip, heading back home today. It's a long drive, so please just prayers for safe travels. But let me know what you think of all this in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly helps. Sharing this on social media helps a lot too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.